Hi, everyone. Welcome to Zzeem Studio for another episode of the HPO podcast. I'm Asif Ahmed. I'm one of the executive directors at Zzeem. And today, as usual, I'll be interviewing Erin Roberts, one of the partners at Zzeem. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Zzeem is a consulting and an association management agency, and we're thrilled to have you with us. Today, we are going to be talking about the art of sponsorship. We are going to be discussing how to pitch your proposal to prospective sponsors and how to build and maintain strong sponsor partnerships. This podcast is part of the High Performance Membership Organization series, otherwise known as the HPO podcast. If you'd like to find out more about what an HPO is all about, just scan the QR code on the screen. Well, with that said, welcome back, Erin, to the show.
Nice to be here, Asif.
What do you think is the most important thing for an association to consider when attracting and retaining sponsors?
Well, Asif, you and I have worked on a lot of projects together, and in my opinion, I think the most important thing to focus on is the fact that you have competition. You're not the only association pounding on the doors of those prospective sponsors, and you're competing for a finite pool of marketing dollars. So, in my opinion, that's the most important thing. And you've got to remember, in order to rise to the top, your offering has to be compelling, it has to be professional, and it has to be properly priced. What do you think,
Perfect.
Asif?
Well said. And I totally concur. You have to be mindful of that. But I also feel that you should have a very strong value proposition for your sponsors, because that is going to what attract your sponsors to you. What do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. That's absolutely fundamental as the sponsor value proposition. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in a few minutes. For those of you who are regular attendees at our events, you know we deliver practical, relevant information that you can take back to your association and use immediately. And these events give us an opportunity to share with you some of the work that we do. So when you're looking for help, we hope you'll think of us.
Well, Erin, you just said you and I worked on various membership associations on their membership programs, and we know that everyone wants a program that is a win-win solution for all stakeholders, which includes obviously the association, their members, and the sponsors. Do you think that's sort of a pie in the sky approach?
Well, it often it's perceived that way. Often you get associations, the board of directors thinking, look, this is just an imposition that we're putting on our members. There's no way it can work. But you and I know it is doable. Most sponsors, they want to develop a relationship with your members. And the reason why they sponsor associations is so that they have an ongoing opportunity to develop that relationship. Most of them are smart enough to understand that a hard sell isn't going to work. I have noticed with the board of directors, if you are in a position where you're having a bit of a struggle there, your board of directors just aren't sure, maybe they're concerned about the kind of partners you might end up with, the idea of an implicit endorsement from the association for the partners. That's something that I often find that executive directors and CEOs have to deal with right up front.
That's a good point. You make a valid point about the board. Now, my next question to you is in particularly to that when you talk about the boards. So how do you bring the board on board? But before I give the floor to you, I just want to make a note of the fact that a lot of the associations that I or you or anybody else amongst the attendees are working, we know that the board has, in some way, form, or shape, has always had this idea of revenue diversification. And if that's the case, then I think one of the most logical, argument could be that if you want to be your revenue to be diversified, this is the best approach, and that's how you can get them on board. What's your take on this?
Well, I think you're right, Asif. That's I've never seen a board that wasn't willing to entertain it at all because they all see the value of revenue diversification for sure. If all of your revenue is coming from membership, then you're very vulnerable. And I think most boards really do get that. What I've found is actually the right starting point with a board like that. Don't dive into what you're going to be selling to sponsors or who they're going to be. Start up front with your sponsorship policy. And basically, every program should have a sponsorship policy. And what that policy is there to do is to define what is not acceptable. That's what you're trying to do. And if you start off right with that, with your board, get your board of directors to work on that policy so that they feel comfortable that they've got a policy that defines what's not acceptable, then generally speaking, they feel quite comfortable delegating the rest of it to the CEO and the staff.
Great. Now, that leads to my next question, and that is, we say we have got the board on board. Now, how involved would you want the board to be in this entire process?
I really feel it's valuable to have the board involved in the outreach process. Not in putting the program together, not in making decisions about logistics, but often when you want to reach out to a sponsor, it's somebody that people on your board of directors already know. And if you're the CEO and you pick up the phone, your call might not even get answered. But if you go to one of your members or your board of directors and say, I'd like an introduction to such and such a company that you do, $1 billion worth of business with, you're going to get that introduction. So you want them available to make introductions. You don't want them to be, making the pitch. You don't want them to be going into any detail. You just want them to make the introduction, hand it over to you, and then they're not involved. They don't have to worry about any concerns one way or the other, but now you have that contact. So yes, you want them to be involved, but not too involved, just as a warm intro.
That's a valid point. Well, as you know, there are two reasons for sponsors to want a relationship with an association. The first is obvious rather, that they want to sell a product or service to our members. The second one is brand alignment. They wanted to enhance their brand by partnering with our association. What's your take on that?
I agree with you, Asif. I think it's really only those two reasons. It's they want to sell stuff or brand alignment. Usually it's because they want to sell something. That is more common. But if your association has a strong role in the community in which you operate, if you've got high visibility and credibility, then brand alignment and selling to your members could be two good reasons why they would want to associate with you.
Yeah, and I want to further press on this with an example that I've had an experience with my association that I am the ED for, and mine is in the healthcare space. And we reached out to a partner which we felt was aligned strategically because they are also in the health space, which is Good Life. So Good Life and my organization had the same goals, same objectives to promote health. So that made, when we made that pitch to the sponsor, that made perfect sense to them. And hence, that was not that they were not selling their services, but they're also trying to align our two brands together for that overall holistic approach towards health and fitness.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent example of brand alignment for sure.
So how often, or is it, or isn't it? A company's primary goal is obviously sell, but they also want to be seen to be supporting a particular profession or industry community. Now, by partnering with the right association, could they accomplish both?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, remember when we were talking about that win-win-win for everyone, including the members? If the sponsor approaches it as if, we are a partner, we're supporting this organization because we want to support the community, that's a really good way of getting the message across to the members. When you're talking to your members, when you're at an event saying, these sponsors really want to support the work that we're doing, And one of the ways that we're able to do all the work that we're doing is because we have these sponsors to support us. And I think it makes members feel more comfortable that the sponsors are really there to help them and the entire community.
Makes perfect sense. Now let's look at the steps that we need to take in order to get our first sponsor. So I guess our first stop is going to be to work on the sponsorship prospectus, and that makes our pitch and our offerings sort of be given a platform
Right.
and also a price point that you attach to it as a marketing document. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you say is to go about how to go about that?
Your prospectus is the most important document here, and a lot of times I find it doesn't get the attention it deserves. You really need to craft a good mix of offerings. It can't be too short, it can't be too long. You need to know in your prospectus who you're pitching to. Because, if you're pitching to, a bunch of booksellers, it's going to be a very different thing than if you're pitching to a bunch of lawyers. So even before you put your prospectus together, you've got to think about who your prospects are, what kind of companies that they are. So yes, absolutely that is the first step. And those are the things you should be thinking about. What are you selling? Like what are the sponsor assets you've got available right now that you could give them visibility with? And who are you selling to? And then your prospectus has to be really well crafted. It has to be the right price. It has to be things that sponsors want in terms of visibility. And then you've got to make sure when you're doing all the pricing that it all makes relative sense. Because if you have something on your prospectus that is a ridiculous bargain compared with everything else, sponsors are smart. They're going to pile all over that one, and you're not going to get any takers at the higher level. So it all has to go together, and it's a lot of moving parts in order to get it done, but it's well worth the effort.
What do prospective sponsors want to know about our association to get them interested in our partnership?
Well, you referred to it earlier, Asif. What is the sponsor value proposition? What is our value proposition to them? Now, when it comes to sales, and let's just focus on that, they want to know how many decision makers or influencers they're going to be able to connect with. And they're also going to want to know the value of their buying decisions. Now, this is where you have to put some effort into doing your research. There's a few things you're going to want to have for your prospectus. If you can't get exact numbers, it's okay to estimate. Go to your members, go to your board of directors, and come up with something that you can defend. Maybe it isn't going to be, available through Statistics Canada, but it's a defensible number. Basically, what we want to know is what is the total spend from your members in various categories? What is their buying power as a group? This group, spends $20 billion annually on these five things. Focus on purchases that are specific to your members. So if they buy specialized devices or products or services, those are the things that are semi-unique to their profession or their industry, and it's going to mean that the people that you're talking to recognize the value of the association because they know those people are the door into their sales. I would not suggest focusing on commodities like, office supplies or mobile services unless your community happens to be a huge buyer of those commodities. But otherwise, I would focus on the things that are more specific to your communities. And you're going to want to know, if let's just say that the members that you serve tend to spend the majority of their money in one of five areas in terms of dealing with suppliers. Ideally, figure out what the total spend is in each of those five areas, even if you can only estimate it. That way, when somebody's coming in and they're trying to sell that product or service, they can see how much value there is in dealing with your members. That basically, it's what is your members' decision making and buying power. That's the brunt of your SVP for sales for sure.
Perfect. So now let's say that we have put all that information together. Sorry, do you want to add something more to that, Aaron?
No, no, no. I was just go ahead.
Okay, so I said, well, maybe you've gathered all that information now. We have gone to our sponsors, and the next step is going to be what kind of visibility should we offer to them? That's a question that a lot of us have.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it depends on the sponsor, doesn't it? What visibility they're going to want.
Absolutely. And For instance, like if it's a consulting firm rather, or a law firm, for instance, they would have different needs and different visibility as opposed to a company that's, I guess, in the manufacturing sector. So they all have their different needs. But is there something that would say like a common thread that goes through all these different sectors?
Yes, it really is. I think it's rare when you have a sector or a community that doesn't use professional services at all. Usually they do use professional services in one means or another, consulting, law, whatever the case may be. And they may also use manufacturing suppliers as well too. So you can't use a one size fits all approach. So for example, with professional service firms, they want speaking opportunities because it gives them an opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge. So for them, conferences and other professional development events are absolutely perfect. And it's good for you too, because generally speaking, they're going to be willing to speak for free because it gets them in front of an audience that really matters to them. Now, you take manufacturers, on the other hand, they make stuff and they want to be able to show that stuff and to demonstrate that stuff. So for them, an in-person trade show would be absolutely ideal for them. Whereas a professional services firm is not interested in, standing behind a booth at a trade show unless that's the only offer that's available to them.
Yeah, so one size fits all is not the approach in this case.
Yes.
But also by way of visibility, we have to have meaningful visibility, right? Because just putting a logo of your sponsors on your website does not translate into meaningful visibility. What, according to you, would consider uh, be considered to be a meaningful visibility for sponsors?
Meaningful visibility is an opportunity make the members aware of the sponsor and have the sponsor have the ability to be able to build a relationship. There has to be some way to interact, even if it's speaking, to an audience, if it's having an opportunity to shake hands at an in-person event. The whole thing that you're bringing to the table as an association is the opportunity to build a relationship. So, like you said, the old days of, I'll put your logo on my website, and we'll have a sign in the front of the venue. You should still be doing that, but that on its own is not meaningful visibility.
And also, Aaron, with the way things have changed over the course of the last couple of years, especially post-pandemic, we have seen a lot of events that are now either virtual 100% or hybrid. That gives us a more of a challenging scenario, doesn't it? Because that both on one hand provides us as the organization to give more value to our sponsors with, I guess, maybe less cost, if you will, and also the sponsors, on the other hand, could get more visibility and more meaningful visibility by way of getting into the nooks and crannies of your event.
Yeah, it is a challenge, Asif. With a virtual event, well, it's much harder to build a relationship with a screen between you than shaking somebody's hand, right? So yeah, that is a real challenge. And to be honest, with virtual events, regardless of the platform, regardless of what gets used, I haven't seen anything that comes close to what an in-person event can deliver. But you just have to try to find ways of using the platform to allow people to set up the scenario so that people can have something to talk about because they're not going to be meeting in the buffet lineup, are they?
For sure. And it'll be very interesting to know from our audience in terms of what they are doing in terms of getting events up and running in this post-pandemic era, and how are they sort of interacting with their sponsors. Now, one thing which we need to keep in mind also when we are putting together the prospectus is the price point. My question to you is, how do we determine that price point for each of these categories that are outlined on our prospectus?
Yeah, that's the $64 billion question, and it's the one that takes the most knowledge and experience, I guess, to put a number on it. First of all, do your research. what should be in each, what are your competitors doing? What are the other organizations offering? What are they charging for it? One of the most common errors we see on pricing is they they put a price on it for the sponsor that reflects what it costs to deliver that thing. So let's say that it is an in-person event and you've got a lunch sponsor and it's going to cost you, $2,000 for the lunch. So you go, okay, well, that's going to be $2,000 or $2,500 or whatever, because that's what it costs us to deliver the lunch. But that's an error. It's a serious error.
Exactly, because what according to you, the value is much more than just that price point for what the cost is for that particular product. So you have to be cognizant of all the other associated costs that are there aside from just the cost of food and beverage for the lunch.
Yeah, well, there's two things to be thinking about here. First of all, the value of a certain sponsor privilege is all about and only about the length and the value of the visibility and the number of people that they can connect with. So let me give you an example. Let's say, again, we're at an in-person event and you've got a breakfast sponsor. And let's say breakfast is from 8 to 9 and the keynote speaker comes on at 9:15. And yours is a crowd that gets out of bed at 9 o'clock and rushes down to see the keynote speaker. In other words, there's going to be nobody milling around at breakfast. So it doesn't matter whether it cost you $1,500 or $500 for the breakfast. That's got nothing to do with what you're going to charge the sponsor. The sponsor's not going to get much out of that event. So what is it that the event is actually worth?
Exactly. So because I know for a fact that a lot of associations price their their the different aspects of the event based on the cost per that event. So for instance, if I were to put a photo booth in for my event, I'll only calculate the cost of putting that photo booth rather, and sort of just go after a sponsor to cover that cost. So that is, I would say, as a typical mindset, which is we need to think beyond that and look at what the sponsor is actually getting from this deal.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it from the sponsor's perspective. Again, what kind of visibility are they getting with who and how many, and how long does that visibility last? So those are the key things that you're going to be looking at. Now, you're going to have to look at what other associations are delivering so that you know whether your price is much higher or much lower. And it could be either. You just need to have an explanation for that. This is why. And you also want to be looking at what they're offering. Another common mistake that we see is low entry level pricing. And when I've asked about this, when we've asked about this, the answer we get is, well, we want to make sure that lots of associations can sponsor us. We want to have lower priced options so that sponsors of all sizes can support us. And I get it, and that's totally legitimate, but it really is impractical because associations, we don't have a ton of people running around doing sponsor sales. Chances are we've got one person doing sponsor sales who's also got something else that they're doing and maybe many other things that they're trying to do. So we've got limited resources. And honestly, I can tell you in my experience, and I know in your experience as well, Asif, it takes about the same amount of effort to sell a $1,000 sponsorship to a small organization as it does to sell a $10,000 sponsorship to a larger organization, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that begs this question, Aaron, that low pricing is, I guess, fine, but when it comes to higher pricing for the different parts of your sponsorship prospectus, what do you think about, like, most of our associations are in not-for-profit sector? Is there perception that we should not be charging too much for any of these elements of our events?
You know, I don't think so, no. I've never experienced I've heard a sponsor say, well, that's outside of my budget, or, that doesn't really represent as much value to me as that, certainly. But I've never heard members say, oh, we should be charging sponsors less. I think members understand that sponsor revenue is important to the association to help deliver member services. And if we can charge more and deliver more value, then all the better, I think. Are you seeing something different?
No, I just feel that at times when we talk about budget and when we're at a finance committee, perhaps there's always this perception of having like a balanced budget, and a surplus is often seen as a not good thing to have. So is that something that we should be mindful when we talk about sponsorship too?
Well, okay, let's talk about that. Look, very briefly, because this is more of a tax situation than it is anything else. But if you are, let's say that you have an annual conference, you consistently run that conference and it consistently makes a huge surplus for that conference. That could be a problem going forward with the CRA from a tax perspective, because you're not supposed to intentionally, host events to make money. And if it's perceived that you're doing that, and it's also perceived that you are competing against the for-profit sector with the advantage of a not-for-profit tax status, that could potentially get you in trouble. So I really encourage you, when it comes to sponsorship, is have a mix of sponsorship that's event specific and also have sponsorship that's year round, that is not tied to a particular event. I also recommend, and this is just for good solid management reporting, when you record the revenue in your income statement from sponsorship, record it as a single line item. Don't record it as revenue from the conference or revenue from an event. Record it as sponsorship. This is sponsorship revenue. That way it isn't inextricably tied to the event, and it does give your board of directors a really solid understanding of where the revenue is coming from.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Now, one thing I've also noticed about sponsorship sales is that you need to prep quite a bit in terms of doing your research, which is very time consuming. It takes time to identify the companies that would be of potential interest. Even more time consuming is to find the right person and the information regarding that person. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, boy, it is really time consuming. And often when organizations are kind of first getting into the sponsorship program, they think all we need is the name of the company and we're done. Well, the name of that company could have tens of thousands of people in different countries around the world. We need to narrow it down a lot more than that. So it's not just getting the type of company or the name of the company. The people that we need to talk to are the marketing people. Almost almost certainly the person that has the budget to spend on sponsorship is part of the marketing area. So that's where we need to get to. And these people don't have their, names and email addresses on the websites. They're not looking to be found. So what you need to do is you need to find an indirect approach to get there. And there's a couple of things that can work. Sometimes if all you've got is digital, then you can probably find who's in charge of business development, sales, that kind of stuff. And sometimes if you reach out to them, you can find out who the right person is that you should be talking to in marketing. A better way, though, is if you've got directors, ideally directors, who are already doing business with a company, ask them to do an introduction to the salesperson who sells to them. They want to have that relationship. It's an important relationship to the salesperson. You can be sure the salesperson knows who the marketing person is. So ask them to make that introduction on your behalf. That's who you have to get to. How you get there, it depends on what the tools are at your disposal. But I know, Asif, you've had really good luck with LinkedIn sometimes.
Yeah, indeed. LinkedIn being one of my sources. There are multiple others, but for LinkedIn, what I usually try to do is go on to the company page and then try to find the list of their staff members and try to find, as you say, staff that are in the departments such as marketing, business development, sales, and then get to the sort of the right person. And that's a challenge in its own self. What I would do in that case is try to look at or try to find their email addresses, which is a challenge in its own sense. What I usually do to get the email addresses is to try to find the syntax of their email. And there are different ways of doing that. What I usually find better is to find the company profile listed by the government of Canada, and then you could go on to that page and see about the company, the owners, major stakeholders, and they usually have one or two email addresses. What helps you with that email address is it gives you a sense of how that email address is laid out. Is it first dot last, first initial last, and the email address? So that gives you a sense. And now then tied back to the names that you've already sort of kind of jotted down from your LinkedIn list, and apply the same formula to create that email address and try to send that email to them. If you get a bounce back, then obviously try it another way. You could also call them up and say at the front desk that, hey, I'm trying to get XYZ. I'm getting a bounce back. What's the best email address to get to them? So there are multiple ways of getting around to that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And keep in mind, the business development people aren't gatekeepers per se. I mean, at the end of the day, if the marketing department makes the right partnerships, it's going to help the business development people make sales. So they're definitely influencers, and you don't want to lose that opportunity. So if your first contact is business development, by all means, put your best foot forward. Make sure you're convincing them that this is a relationship that is really going to help them to get more sales, and they're going to be much more inclined to make that introduction to their marketing person. So keep in mind, you really want to sell both parties, because if the marketing person gets sold and then they go to their business development head and say, okay, this is what we're doing, and they go, nah, that's not going to be of any use. That's not what you want. You want both of them to be on your side. So there's no harm starting with business development at all.
Yeah, and the other idea that I had wanted to share with our audience is the fact that there are press releases, obviously, put out by these organizations. You could also look at their press releases and find contact information from there. That could be another source of getting the information that you're looking for.
That's a really good point, Asif.
So now, Aaron, let's suppose we have got all our ducks in a row. Now we have got our call booked. What next?
Oh, you mean the pitch?
The pitch. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So we've prepared that awesome prospectus, and that's got us a meeting. So now we have time to make the pitch. We know we're talking to the decision maker. One of the things that mistakes we often make is, okay, we've got half an hour. So now I've got 30 minutes that I'm just going to spew all over this marketing person that's all about us. That is not the way to go about it. They've seen your prospectus. They probably, maybe something in it has appealed to them. What you need to be spending that time doing is asking them what their marketing objectives are right now. What are they trying to do? Find out what they need. And then once you found out what they need, then only then bring up the stuff that's in your prospectus or in your mind that's actually going to help them to accomplish that.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with that more. My recommendation to all of you would be to never to go in with this mindset that it's either my way or the highway, because I've seen a lot of those folks during my time when I used to buy or sell sponsorship, where people are more interested in just blurring out what they are offering and not listening to me in terms of what I want. So it has to be both, because when you're going to a table for negotiation, you have to have both your and your opposing party's needs in front of you. So in that case, it's essential that we have and we know what is in it for them, so that we can create something customized if need be for them.
Yeah, exactly, Asif. And I was just thinking of another thing as well, too. One bad habit is going in and then just spewing, as I said, all over the marketing person. It's all about us. It's all about us. And you get to the end of the meeting, and you've learned nothing. You've heard nothing from them. The other thing that is annoying for them is asking open-ended questions that are just too open-ended. So, tell me about your company. Tell me about your marketing program. They don't want to waste their time doing that. be specific about what the questions are. Make sure that they understand you know something about what they are selling to your members. So I
Exactly.
see, you're selling a lot of this to your members, but in this other area, it looks like your competitor is actually ahead of you in that. That means you've done your homework and now it's worth having a conversation with you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also, what you could go a step further and say, you have got this XYZ product, and we feel that that's going to go down very well with our group because of XYZ reason. So to give them a more compelling reason to be a part of this partnership.
Yes, and in the current environment, um, right now we've got a lot of big companies in Canada that have been told to buy Canadian. So that means they are shifting their buying, perhaps from non-Canadian companies, and they're looking to find Canadian companies that deliver those goods. So the first thing we should all be doing is going to any Canadian company that is competing for business within Canada with non-Canadian companies, particularly American companies, because of the situation that's going on right now. So this is a beautiful opportunity to reach out to Canadian business owners all over Canada and say, this is your opportunity to slide in here and get the advantage of Buy Canadian. And the best thing that you can do is become a sponsor of our association because it's going to introduce you to all of these companies and members.
Totally agree. Well, that's amazing, Aaron. Thank you so much for all that wisdom. Let's recap what you just talked about. So the first thing that you said was to ensure each sponsor partnership is a win for everyone, which includes the members, the association, and the sponsors. Two, ensure you have a prospectus that is compelling, professional, and priced right. Three, stay away from low-level pricing. Four, ensure your prospectus describes the buying power of your members and the types of roles they hold in their organizations. Five, structure your offerings to provide different types of visibility. Six, use a member focus group to create a target list. And number seven, find out what your prospects need from their marketing spend and customize a package for them. If you'd like help with your membership, with your sponsorship program, my apologies, please reach out to us and we can help. With that, we'd now go into live Q&A. Kevin, do we have any questions?
We do. So the first question is, what are the best practices for sponsor appreciation and acknowledgement?
Good question, Kevin. And I'm going to make the assumption that we're not talking about sponsor deliverables, but sponsor appreciation and acknowledgement above and beyond that. I do find that if it is an event, whether it's in person or virtual, acknowledgement from the podium from the top dog, either the CEO or the chair slash president, make sure that there's a verbal acknowledgement of at least the larger sponsors. But you can also have it on all of your member communication. You can have it in the footer of every single email that goes out to all of your members. Thank you to our sponsors and list who they are. Any of your digital platforms as well too. Yeah, your website, your social platforms. Those are all good places to acknowledge and appreciate your sponsors. Asif, is there anything you can think of that you think would be good with that?
Yeah, those are great ideas. And also, I would like to add to that is perhaps have, if it's an in-person event, have a pull-up banner with the sponsor logos. Although it's kind of, from back in the day kind of thing, but if you don't want to do that, perhaps still have all the logos up on the projection screen while the session is not on, maybe during lunch or any break, so that recognition is continuing while they're there. The eyeballs are still on them. And the other thing that it could be, as Aaron said, podium time is great, but if you could find a way to involve them, say if it's a dinner, a gala dinner, or an award ceremony, to perhaps ask one of the sponsor to come up and hand that out. Like that could be a recognition, because you could say, company XYZ, John from XYZ is here to hand it out. But that gives that additional sort of a kick to the acknowledgement.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can do that obviously on a virtual platform as well too. And it humanizes the person and it helps them to build relationships because when they see them later, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I saw you. You handed out the award." I think that's an excellent idea. Kevin, do we have another question?
We do. So next question is, how do we ensure that we're providing true value to our sponsor partners?
Well, remember what Asif and I were talking about earlier about doing the pitch. In order to provide value to them, you need to know what they need. So having that conversation with them, is there a particular product or service they're trying to promote right now? Is there a new market that they're trying to work their way into? Make sure that you've asked them the right questions so that you know what is going to represent value to them. Once you know that, it's probably going to be fairly easy to put together the package that's going to work for them. And it should be a collaborative, it should definitely be a collaborative partnership. I would also add, make sure that you don't just sell it and drive on and then pick up the phone again, a year later and ask them for money again. Make sure that you're checking in with them at least 2 or 3 times over the course of the year to find out, oh, well, how did that particular platform work for you? How did that event go for you? Get their feedback as it's fresh in their mind. That would be what I would suggest. Asif, have you got any more ideas for value?
I totally concur with you, Aaron. What I would say in addition to that, which you in part you said that yourself, to be mindful of, as I said earlier, of your sponsors, what is in it for me? Because
Right.
you have to be cognizant of what values them, what do they feel valued by, and that's critical. So you have to find that as opposed to just going on this rampage of selling them stuff without knowing what they want. So true value to me is something that me as a sponsor would appreciate and value. So that is to find that out and to deliver on that would be the true value.
Yeah, good point, Asif. Do we have another question, Kevin?
We do. So can you recommend a template or model for event sponsorship in particular?
Yeah, that would be great. It would be wonderful if we had a template and all we needed to do was plug in the photos and we're good to go. But no, I can't. And the reason being is this is and I assume you're talking about a sponsor prospectus for an event. This is so specific to you as an organization. Remember, your members are your members. They're not anyone else's members, or they're not everyone else's members. And describing their buying power and their kind of roles, that's probably unique to your organization. The value of what you're delivering is also probably unique to your organization. Do you have tens of members or do you have thousands of members? That again is going to be unique to your organization. Your program assets, what are the things that you do that you can give your sponsors visibility on? Your program assets are going to be different than another association's program assets. It also depends on who your prospects are. Because, like Asa was talking about earlier, if all of your prospects are in manufacturing, then there's no point using somebody else's prospectus, which is geared towards professional service firms. So what you do need to do is you need to do your research, find out what other people are offering, think about what might make sense for you, and then put all those pieces together and come up with your own thing. A template just doesn't work. Asif, am I wrong?
You're absolutely right. I would highly recommend everybody to steer away from that approach. Not because that's not a good practice, but also because when you come up with your own prospectus, your own design, that gives you that extra motivation to go ahead and sell it. So, and that also gives you the opportunity to be more creative, both by way of design and also by way of the content. So I would, and also, so that with a set template, the drawback would be that you'll inadvertently fall back on that template year over year, which is not a good idea. So every time, come up with a fresh idea with fresh content. And one thing that while we're talking about templates, I would also like to talk about the way we format our offerings. we have seen in the past that typically an association would go around selling their wear in terms of tiers like gold, silver, bronze, etc.
Right.
Which since we have moved away from that, and now there's a different concept, which is to sell event specific items, for instance, lunch sponsor, or maybe a fireside chat sponsor. This gives you not only more creativity to your perspectives, but also gives the sponsors a lot of wiggle room in terms of what they can do with their sort of their product or service sale, and also by way of engaging with your members. So I would say keep those in mind when you're building your prospectus.
Yeah, great points, Asif. Thank you. Kevin,
All right,
any
so our
questions?
next question is, so for an association whose events are attended mainly by technicians rather than marketing decision makers, and for an association whose event attendance has been declining post-pandemic, how should they create and frame a sponsor value proposition that remains compelling to sponsor partners under those two constraints?
Okay, well, let's start with the first one. What I think I hear you saying is the people that are attending the events are not the decision makers, and that you don't really have decision makers attending your events. So there's no direct contact with decision makers. The question that that you would want to be asking yourself is, what role do the technicians play in the buying decision? Because if they are influencers, maybe the technicians are the end users of software where the decision is made, further up the food chain. Find out what influence the technicians actually have. And that's what you're actually selling then, because if what you're giving is access to technicians, what is the influence that they have?
Right. So next question is, in a recent satisfaction survey, I have asked attendees what they would be willing to pay for hotel rooms and for event admission, and this association has also asked, what sponsors would be willing to pay what they'd be comfortable with. Would you consider this an appropriate and effective approach? Is there anything that you would suggest to this association?
Well, I definitely agree with the satisfaction survey. And to ask them about hotel rooms and admission to the event, that's a great time to be asking it because it's fresh in their mind, and they'll know what the market is at that moment in time. So I think it's a great idea. Asking sponsors what dollar value they are comfortable sponsoring with, it certainly doesn't hurt to ask that question, but I don't know how informed a response you'll get. It's kind of like saying, well, Asif, how much are you willing to spend on shoes? Well, it depends.
Yeah.
What are the shoes? What do they look like? What do they feel like? What can I do with those shoes? And I kind of have a feeling it's sort of hard for sponsors to answer that question. Maybe asking them what kind of visibility would work for them, that might be a really good question to ask the sponsors because you might get some new ideas. There might be things out there you're just not aware of, or maybe they'll tell you something that isn't out there and they wish was out there. Asif, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And also, while survey is absolutely amazing thing to do to find out more about any aspect of your business, you could also have some questions pertaining to the budget. Like you could say, what influences your budget, or as opposed to asking how much allocation you have, you could because as we know, a lot of organizations rather, their budget kind of goes up and down. So asking them what influences their budgetary decision could be a way to kind of figure out what their needs are.
Good point. Very good point. Any
Right.
more questions, Kevin?
Just a couple more. Some members are requesting that we offer exhibitor space on a complimentary basis, but currently we have no sponsorship revenue at all, with the exception of a small amount that we get from events co-hosted with other associations. Ticket sales fully cover event costs, and we're targeting a 25% minimum margin. How should we approach this situation?
Wow, I can't say I've experienced that. I mean, really, the only reason I can think of that you've got exhibitor space is to introduce suppliers to your members, which is a great thing. But I don't think I've ever heard of members saying, well, I'm not going to attend the event unless there's exhibitor space. So I want you to give it away for free. So that's odd. If you're doing an in-person event, exhibitor space is expensive. It costs you money. So unless members want to pay a higher ticket price, and maybe they do, maybe this is something that really matters to them, but I think they need to understand if that's the kind of the demand they're making is okay, we can do that, and that will increase the ticket price by blah, blah, blah. How do you feel about that? So that's something to think about. Generally speaking, too, I find that when it comes to exhibit space, it's not just the price of the exhibit space as much as it is the overall cost of the company of getting staff there, of setting up a booth, of taking the time off work, the travel, all that kind of stuff. I mean that alone is way more expensive than the cost of a booth. So usually you're getting less pushback on the booth price than you are on just the whole expense of me as a company actually being there. So I mean that, Asif, have you ever heard of this exhibit space for free?
I actually have, and people have, and this is pre-pandemic when we used to have a lot of trade shows for the association that I was working for. And what usually they would want is not exactly a free booth, but yes, free booth in the sense that if I'm already a sponsor, they would, at times I've heard people say, okay, why don't you throw in a 10 by 10 with the sponsorship package, because that'll give me more room to kind of showcase my products and such. So that I've heard, but on its own, because if you're doing a trade show, which we used to do in the past, I've never heard of that. What I did hear, that if it's a 10 by 10, a price of for the price of a 10 by 10, they wanted a 10 by 20 perhaps. But all that to say that, to me, if you're able to offer a booth space, that certainly multiplies and magnifies the sponsor visibility. Because if you do that, you could have perhaps a decal or whatever around that space. So you could certainly add to your sponsorship perspectives. That's one thing to think about if you're wanting to add that space, and if there's a demand, as Aaron said, do let them know that the price is going to be exponentially high because of the cost of space and whatnot. At the same time, you could also build on that and sell more sponsorship, being more creative around that space.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Asif. It is pretty common for in-person sponsorships where there is booth space, that for the higher level items, booth space is included as part of it. But still, they're effectively paying for it because they're buying a sponsorship, the value of which is greater than the value of the booth. I do want to address virtual event booths as well, too. And you might say, well, we can offer those for free because it doesn't cost us any more. We've already bought using the software. It doesn't cost us any more, but it does, because just to service sponsors, it takes staff time, and you're trying to service them at the same time you're trying to put on the conference and do everything else. So virtual or not, even if it doesn't cost you anything out of pocket, staff time is going to be required to help serve the people that have the booth. So keep in mind there's no free lunch here.
No, but I also think, Aaron, at least in my experience, the virtual booths that we used to get, those would cost us, because
Right. And they typically do. You're right.
they do. So it's not that it's free. And on top of that, you add your staff time to kind of set it up. And it's not easy. It's quite complicated. So, and what the return on that investment is, that's up for discussion, but that's perhaps for another day. But yeah, that does cost a lot. Sorry, not a lot, but that costs some. And you have to just weigh the pros and cons of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, do we have any more questions?
Yes, looks like we have one more. So this question is, I often see sponsorship packages offered with different tiers, for example, gold and silver, or they're um, also tiered by specific branded items such as lanyards or badges. Is there one approach to sort of tiering sponsorship levels that that sort of speaks to what sponsors are looking for? Like, is there one approach that you would recommend that sort of is compelling
Well,
to sponsors?
I think you do want to have individual one-off items. So, lanyard sponsor, they're sponsoring one thing, it's very specific, it's the lanyards. And then, so that's kind of your individual item tier. And then above that, you want to have bundles. So above that, you might have your put a name on it. I don't like gold, silver, bronze, or precious stones or anything like that. But it could be maybe you've got your contributing sponsor above that, and then maybe at the top you've got the something else sponsor. And in that case, all of those are going to be bundles. They're going to be packages of individual things that together add up to a whole bundle of deliverables that you're offering to that sponsor. So if that was the route you wanted to go, then I would suggest that you come up with labels for the top tiers for the bundles that you're offering, and then individual names for what individuals are sponsoring. So I like lanyard sponsors. It makes it very clear that it was me that sponsored the lanyards. It was me that sponsored the lunch. Those things are all very clear. And then the bundles, because they're sponsoring a number of different things, the bundles have different names on it. So supporting, contributing, premier, all those kinds of things are words that you can use. But try to stay away from precious stones and metals. Asif,
Yeah, and
metals are
yeah, and
so
also
yesterday.
true. And but I'd like to add to the fact that, as Aaron said, bundles are good. So to summarize the conversation, I'd say, yeah, throw in both the combos and your standalones, but don't make it too complicated. I think
Yes.
that's where people get lost in translation. Your message is lost in translation because it's too complicated. People don't get it. If there's a combo, keep it like one or two at the most, and then you've got your standalones. For those who are trying, and I highly recommend, and which is we've seen that it's great to do, is to have year-round sponsorships, right? So, and if you do that, that's again going to be a bundled offer, but keep that a separate document. My inclination is always never to add that to your sponsored perspective, your event sponsored perspectives. Have it as a separate document. And if you're either emailing it to somebody or actually physically taking it along, have two separate documents. Your year-round or your corporate partnership perspectives should be separate from your event, because that keeps the two aligned and separate.
Right. And then just to add on to what you're saying, Asif, your year-round sponsors are going to have privileges at all of your events. But you're right. You may just be selling event specific to one and year-round to another. Absolutely. Kevin, do we have any more questions?
That was the final question.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Aaron and Kevin. And thank you for joining us today. Please join us again for our next podcast on August 27th. We are going to be talking about what's going on with AI in the association sector. We'll be interviewing association research expert Gerald Graham. He'll be sharing the results of the recent AI survey. Till then, goodbye.